Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as black as ebony. She was known throughout the kingdom for her kindness and her gentle heart. Snow White's mother, the queen, had passed away when she was very young. The king was heartbroken, but he eventually married another woman. Snow White's stepmother, the new queen, was incredibly beautiful, but she was also incredibly vain and wicked. She was always concerned with her own beauty and would often ask her magic mirror, which hung in the royal chamber, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For years, the magic mirror always replied, "You are the fairest, my queen." But as Snow White grew older, she blossomed into a radiant and kind-hearted young woman. One day, as Snow White was admiring herself in a mirror, the queen overheard her humming a cheerful tune, and she felt a surge of jealousy. She rushed to the magic mirror and asked her question once more. To her astonishment, the mirror replied, "Snow White is the fairest of them all." The queen was filled with rage. She couldn't bear the thought of Snow White being more beautiful than her. Her heart turned as cold as ice, and she began to plot against the young princess. One day, the queen ordered her royal huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest and get rid of her. The huntsman, however, couldn't bear to harm Snow White, for she was so kind and gentle. He told her to run deep into the forest and never return. Snow White obeyed, and she soon found herself in a dark and unfamiliar part of the woods. She felt lost, alone, and terribly frightened. But then she discovered a small and enchanting cottage nestled deep within the trees. It was so tiny and cozy that it looked like it had been plucked from a fairy tale. Inside the cottage, Snow White found 7 little beds, a dining table with 7 chairs, and even 7 tiny sets of dishes. As she explored, she was surprised to see that everything was well kept, as if someone lived there. But there was no sign of the cottage's owners. Exhausted and hungry, Snow White decided to rest and wait for the owners to return. She prepared a simple meal and cleaned up the cottage, as she couldn't bear to leave it in disarray. Meanwhile, the owners of the cottage, 7 dwarfs named Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey, were returning home after a long day of mining in the mountains. They were shocked to see their cottage so neat and tidy, and they were even more surprised when they discovered Snow White sleeping in one of their beds. Snow White awoke to find 7 little faces staring at her in amazement. She explained her story to the dwarfs, and they felt sympathy for her. They decided to let her stay with them, for they saw that she was kind-hearted and in need of help. The dwarfs were delighted to have Snow White in their home, and she was grateful for their kindness. She helped with the housework, and together they became like a small family, sharing laughter and stories by the cozy fireplace. Back at the castle, the queen was unaware of Snow White's survival. When she asked the magic mirror once more who the fairest of them all was, she was horrified to hear, "Snow White is the fairest." The queen's envy consumed her, and she knew she had to act. She used her dark magic to create a poison apple, one that would put Snow White into a deep, unbreakable sleep. She disguised herself as an old peddler woman and set out for the forest. The queen arrived at the dwarf's cottage and offered Snow White the poison apple. Snow White, being kind and trusting, took a bite, and immediately she fell into a deep sleep. The dwarfs returning home were devastated to find Snow White in this state, and nothing they did could wake her. Unbeknownst to them, the prince of the kingdom happened to be passing through the forest that day. He saw Snow White and was captivated by her beauty. As he leaned down and kissed her, the magic of true love broke the spell. Snow White opened her eyes, and they fell in love at that very moment. Snow White returned to the palace with the prince, and they were soon married in a grand ceremony. The queen, still consumed by jealousy, faced the consequences of her wickedness. Snow White and her prince ruled the kingdom with kindness and love, and they were beloved by all. Snow White's heart had won over not just the prince but everyone she met, including the dwarfs who had become her dearest friends.